Our very own Mark Pomeroy is taking today's message. It's Lead Like Jesus, week 3. Enjoy.
Well, hey there, Elevate family. Great to have you with us again. For those of you that have been a part of our online family for a while. And also, special shout out, as Tom's already done, but let me just echo that. Those of you joining us for the first time from wherever in the world you're joining us from, it's fantastic to have you with us. We're actually landing in the third and final week of a series we've called Lead Like Jesus. And it's actually the first time that I've ever taught leadership to the broader church. Historically, it's something that I've specifically taught in leadership settings, or to leaders, or to team members who are making their way into leadership. And yet, the reality is that all of us, as followers of Jesus, are called to some level or some amount of leadership, so that we can actually lead people towards Jesus, to point them towards true north, that is Jesus. And the way we do that, the actual platform that we use, is influence. And that's what I think is the best definition of leadership. It's the one we've been using for this series, and it's the one I've been using for many, many years, that leadership is ultimately influence. It's not necessarily position, although it can come with a position. But even if you don't have a position, you can still be used to lead and to influence people. Now, week 1, we talked about the why, a message called It Starts with the Heart. What's the motive that we need to have as people who want to influence other people? Is it about us, or is it about them? Last week, we talked about teamwork, borrowing a quote from Michael Jordan: talent wins games, teamwork wins championships. And it's this whole idea that we can't do anything significant by ourselves. And so if you've missed either of those 2 weeks, I strongly recommend go back either here on this platform and watch those, or you can jump into our podcast and take us with you in audio format. Every major podcast channel, just look for Elevate Church Perth and we'll be there. I do hope, though, that this series has been fanning the flames of your desire to want to grow in influence. You know, I'm aware that some of you are already on that leadership pathway, and hope this has actually helped kick you up another level. I know that some of you have kind of been inspired to start this journey, to say, hey, God, I want to become influential. I want to really get into that space with my life. I also suspect that there's maybe a few of you that are thinking, oh, I don't know about this. I don't know if I want to dip my toes in the water. Well, you're actually in very good company. In January 1981, Ronald Reagan was about to be inaugurated as the 40th president of the United States. And on the day of his inauguration, in the morning, he was nowhere to be found. And his deputy chief of staff actually was a little concerned that the soon-to-be president had overslept his alarm. And so the deputy chief of staff sheepishly went to Ronald Reagan's room, knocked on the door, just kind of opened it slightly, and said, sir, it's 8:30 a.m. In a couple of hours, you're going to be sworn in as the President of the United States. And there was silence for a moment, and then Ronald Reagan just pulled back the covers and said to his deputy chief of staff, do I have to? So it happens to the best of us, this potential reluctance to want to grow in influence. But if you do feel that way, you are in good company, because Jesus himself chose a very unlikely group to be his team, to be his leaders, to be the ones that he developed and ultimately deployed to influence the world, to spread the kingdom of God throughout the world. And what Jesus did, among other things, is he blew the doors off the myth that leaders are born, not made. You might have heard that, or you might have bought into that. I'm not a leader, and they're a leader, they're a natural leader. And it is true that leadership does come more naturally to some people than others. However, it's not true that your starting point, wherever you are right now, has to be your stopping point. You, like Jesus' chosen 12, can grow in your leadership. Another thing I want to encourage you with, if you're kind of just, I don't know if I want to dip my toes in the water, is something that Paul wrote to the church in Colossae that gives us a little bit of, hopefully, encouragement. Now, this is what Paul wrote to them. In fact, he was writing it to slaves who were working for masters. They didn't really have a choice in the matter. And he encouraged them, work from the heart for your real master, for God, confident that you'll get paid in full when you come into your inheritance. Keep in mind always that the ultimate master you're serving is Christ. The reality is, if we understand that in every sphere of life that we're ultimately serving Jesus, then he's always at the top of the org chart. And you'll never, even if you're facing some headwinds, you'll never be out the front facing those headwinds all by yourself, because Jesus is ahead of us always when it comes to leadership. And that should hopefully give us some confidence and reassurance. So what I want to do today in the third week of our Lead Like Jesus series is I want to talk about some habits of healthy leaders. Just a quick flyover. And really this series has been something of a flyover. I mean, there is so much more to learn, so much more to discover. I'm going to talk about that in the third habit, of healthy leaders. But let me start with this one. Healthy leaders model humility. Now, that H word, humility, it's important that we understand what that means, because some people have confused humility with having low self-esteem or feeling like you've got nothing to contribute. And if that's the definition, then people who think that's how we ought to act and behave, with low self-esteem and feeling like we've got nothing to contribute, you'll never grow into being a leader, because you just shrink back, you'll crop yourself out, you'll kind of hide in plain sight in the shadows. So let me give what I think is a better definition of humility. And this is something that has been around. This is a definition that's been around for a very long time. In fact, so much so that no one really knows who made this quote to start with. But here it is. It's very simple. It says that humility isn't thinking less of yourself. Humility is thinking of yourself less. In other words, we can have and hopefully do have a great sense of of the worth and the value that God places in us. And we don't have to hide from that. We don't have to shrink back from that. But we take that and we understand that that's not all about us. That's not all for us. That actually God puts things in us in order for us to then go ahead and invest those into other people. So humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. And this really plays back to something that I taught on in week 1 of this series. The difference between responsibility-based leadership or rewards-based leadership. See, rewards-based leadership operates from the motive that it's all about you, that as the leader, it's all about people serving you, and that you might actually ultimately feel threatened by the growth and the development of the people you're leading. And so because of that, you might hold back. And yet, responsibility-based leaders, they understand that they've been put in that place, in that role. They've been given that opportunity to actually lift other people up, to actually develop other people. And not only are they not threatened by the growth and the development and the effectiveness of the people they're leading, they're actually committed to it. They actually understand that there's enough to go around and that their success is reflected in the success of the people they lead. And you know this to be true because you would be, and potentially in your life have been, very reluctant to follow people who make it all about themselves. And yet you're very willing to go the extra mile for people that you know their motive is you and the team's objectives moving forward. In fact, let me just put a final word on this point that healthy leaders model humility, something that Solomon wrote, wise Solomon, King Solomon, in the book of Proverbs, one of his wise proverbs. He said this very, very simply: the stuck up fall flat on their faces, but down to earth people stand firm. Here's another habit of healthy leaders: they respond well to criticism. Now, like it or not, criticism is an almost unavoidable aspect of leadership. Now, there's ways to avoid it. In fact, one of the easiest ways to avoid it comes from a famous saying that says that to avoid criticism, say nothing, do nothing, and be nothing. So it's simple. If you devote your life to nothing of significance, the critics will actually leave you alone. Not sure that's the goal of life. By the way, little Marco's pro tip thrown in there, I found another way to not necessarily avoid criticism, but limit criticism. I stopped posting on social media. Hello. Anyway. But as you grow in your influence, as you develop in your leadership, it is almost inevitable that some amount of criticism will come your way. And part of our growth as leaders is to develop the tools and the skills and the mindset to respond well to criticism when it's inbound. Now, let me start with what not to do. One thing, don't ignore everything. I'm just not going to listen to anybody ever. Well, that's just a little bit ignorant. And you will, if you just block everything out, you'll actually miss some growth opportunities, because in some criticism, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but in some criticism, there might be something helpful that's going to be helpful for you and or the people that you're leading. And here's another thing not to do. Don't get defensive. If someone lobs a grenade your way, don't just lob one back, because that doesn't help. That just escalates things. In fact, what it does is it layers a level of emotion that previously didn't exist, that kind of obfuscates the issue at hand, and often it becomes the issue. Solomon gave us another little bit of a pro tip: a gentle response diffuses anger, but a sharp tongue kindles a temper fire. So here's a few things to do to respond well to criticism. At the outset, consider the source. Don't give everyone an equal voice. We live in a culture, particularly now modeled in a lot of social media, where everyone thinks they're entitled to an equal voice. But the reality is, leaders understand that not everyone is entitled to an equal voice, that it's not helpful, it's not a good use of your time and your energy to listen and give attention at the same level to everything inbound. So consider the source. Who is making this? I'll come back to this in a moment as well. And also understand that you don't have to answer every critic. Sometimes the best response is no response at all. Now, I said earlier, don't ignore everything, but at the same time, you don't have to respond actively to everything either. And if you think that doesn't sound very Christian, you mean like, well, Jesus wouldn't do that. I mean, he loves everyone the same. He loves everyone the same, but he didn't respond to everyone the same. Some critics, he answered their question with a question. Sometimes he got angry and pushed back, and he's Jesus. We'll give him a free kick on that one. And here's another one. Sometimes he didn't say anything at all. In fact, there was a time when literally on the eve of his crucifixion, where the religious leaders had thrown him in front of the Roman leader, a guy named Pontius Pilate, and insisted that Pilate sentence him to death. And Pilate asked Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? Well, Jesus answered, if you say so. And the high priests let loose a barrage of accusations. So Pilate asked again, Jesus, aren't you going to answer anything? That's quite a list of accusations. And now Jesus said nothing. So sometimes he engaged, and that was his response. And sometimes he didn't engage. And that's still a response. Not engaging is still a response. Now, there's a little red flag that I encourage you to look for. And this comes back to the idea of consider the source. If the person who's coming at you with the criticism has a track record of cynicism and negativity, then it's reasonably likely that their goal isn't your improvement and the team's improvement. In fact, it's quite likely that you're simply next in line for them to be lobbing a grenade. So I worked out years ago my criteria for who I listen to when it comes to feedback and so-called criticism, although typically the people I listen to, they're not coming as critics, they're coming as partners and friends and team members and people who have my back and want to help make sure that I, as a leader, don't have blind spots. And their motive is always better, improvement, effectiveness. So my criteria, and this can't be your criteria. This is probably a little bit more for a church leader. But you can maybe adapt this and make it your criteria. My criteria is very simple. I have 3 criteria for whose criticism I ingest. And that is that they have to love Jesus. It's a good starting point. They have to love me. And they have to love Elevate Church. And if they tick all 3 boxes, then I'm in. I'm like, hey, come on, give me a gift. That's great. Help me. And look, they might not be right, but I'm definitely going to listen. And together we'll evaluate things. And together we'll build better understanding. But it's always with defenses right down, because those people over time have demonstrated those things. And by over time demonstrating those things, loving Jesus, loving me, loving Elevate Church, they've actually already built a platform of trust where they can come in, and I don't even put defenses up, and they can offer up their perspectives, and we can have a very healthy and even sometimes robust discussion. Now, this, by the way, does also play out on a personal level when people come at you. And so next week, we're very intentionally launching a new series called Don't Take the Bait. It's all about offense. It's all about developing the ability to not take offense, because it's a choice. Not take offense, even when people have said and done things that are offensive. In fact, we're going to teach on how to develop the skills so that when people are offensive, you can actually respond in a way that not only doesn't escalate the issue, but actually diffuses the issue, like Solomon recommended. And actually develop the skills where you can build trust off the back of people saying and doing offensive, dumb stuff. So look, that's next week. And it's a juicy topic. We live in an era where it is more important than ever before. And that's why we're going to start that series next week. But look, here's the third and the final habit I want to talk about today. Healthy leaders pursue growth and learning. And this is part of our code as Elevate Church. It ties into something I taught about last week, the importance of being coachable. And the key word here is pursue. It recognizes that your growth is your responsibility. My growth is my responsibility. So we ought to pursue growth and learning. Don't wait to hopefully somebody just hands it to you or spoon feeds it to you. Go after it. Chase it down. Chase them down. And here's the deal. A couple of decades ago, when I began my leadership development journey, in order to access leadership resources, I would have to physically go to a library, yes, or a physical brick and mortar bookstore. I would have to, and did, if I wanted to hear some leadership teaching, I did subscribe, pay money, and subscribe to several, listen to this, tape of the month clubs. Yeah, cassette tapes that would be sent from a leadership development person and sent in the mail and arrive, and I would put them in my car's cassette tape player. And if I wanted to go to a leadership conference or a seminar, I would have to go to a leadership conference and a seminar, and that would sometimes be in the city I live in, great. But sometimes I would pay for myself to travel interstate, or in some cases travel overseas. Here's the thing, it's 2021. All of those things, books, audio training, and conferences, seminars, webinars, they are literally, and I mean literally nowadays, at our fingertips. And if we take on this leadership habit of pursuing growth and learning, it is more accessible than ever before, and no less important than ever before. 2 weeks ago, I loved the opportunity that we had to share an interview from Christ Church of the Valley in the greater Phoenix area in the US by the senior leader of that church from one of their members, Mary Peters. And go back and watch and listen to that. Super inspiring. Well, today Ashley is interviewing another member of their church, someone who's, well, here's the story.
Jim, thanks for being with us. And for those that don't know you, give us a quick introduction.
I'm a founding member at CCV. I'm in the construction business. I've been in the construction business. I started the business in 1976. I've seen a lot of cycles. At the peak of the business, we had over 2,000 employees. In the last 10 years, we've been in the top 10 privately owned family businesses in Arizona.
Jim, first of all, thank you for being a founding member. There's not many people at our church that have seen what you've seen, how God's moved at CCV, so thank you for all that you've done. You've been leading for almost more years than I've been alive. And
wow,
yet,
it's dating me a lot.
I know. But you're really this experienced leader that's been doing it for a long time. But one of the things I've observed about you is you always have this humility about you of always wanting to get better. And I want to talk about that because I feel like the gravitational pull of leadership is you lead to a certain point where you think, I have it all done, but you have this habit of inviting these consultants and other people to come in and tell you, what can I do to be better? Mm-hmm. What drives that in you?
You know, if I learn and grow, I care about my people enough to invest into learning and growth, then I can have the opportunity to bring them along with me, mm-hmm. and that they can learn and grow. And I mean, in the end of this whole thing, it's about the contribution that we made, not how big the business is or how successful the business is or was. It's about, did we make a difference? Yeah,
that's good. How much do you think the what you learned to develop in that 1987 crash helped create in you some habits and some values that helped you be resilient during the crashes that are to come. I mean, we're right in the middle of a very much an economic uncertain time right now. You know, certain industries are hit worse than others, but how much do you think that really prepared you?
Parts of that were pretty painful. So I remember going looking for a quiet place, trying to get away from all the noise. And then, quieting my mind, trying to make my heart still so I could hear God. I would, I wrote this down. It's like when we concentrate and meditate on God's work, we can have an understanding that goes beyond our human capability. And so I really learned to lean on God a lot more. I had nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
It felt like I had nowhere else to go.
How has your faith as a follower of Jesus helped make you a better leader or just inform your leadership style?
Well, I think that's it. This dichotomy between God and ego. So how do I keep my ego out of this? And it's by having this communication with God. This constant relationship with God that keeps the me out of it and kind of keeps me centered.
Yeah. Of all the habits you've had to learn as a leader, which one's been hardest to incorporate in your life?
I would say that I've always been a learner, but up until maybe in my 40s, maybe around that time with Shay, it was more of a learner in the School of Hard Knocks. I've probably got a master's there, maybe even a doctorate by now in the School of Hard Knocks. Yeah. When I got intentional about learning, and I read, you get a hunger for it, and you're consistent about learning. There's just a wealth of great knowledge out there, a wealth of information about how to be a better businessman, how to be a better leader. And then when I learned to be able to put that in application too. So it's like if I read something, I want to pick one or two things out of that book, put them into application right away.
There you go.
Because the knowledge without the application isn't enough either. So we're going to try it.
Love that. Jim, what's one leadership habit that you will do every day without fail?
I read every day, every morning. I meditate on God's word, and I read something of significance every day.
Wow.
I don't absorb a whole book. Sometimes it might be just a chapter.
Yeah.
Or something. Maybe it's something that it's also maybe something that I get on a good video, YouTube video. But it's usually something that I try to do something, read something of significance, something that's going to help me, something I learn from.
My guess is some days you think, I don't know if I got that much out of it, but it's the multiplication effect of every single day, 365 days a year. I mean, that's going to transform your life. God's word every day, learning something about leadership every day. I can't think of a better habit for every leader to have. That's inspiring. Jim, thanks for coming in and spending some time with us. I know it's made an impact on me, and I bet you it's making an impact on a lot of us.
I've enjoyed it too. Thanks for having me.
So I take two key things away from Jim Younger's telling his story. Number one, on the surface, it looks like he's hit his peak. He's at peak leadership effectiveness, but he understands that healthy leaders continue to pursue growth and learning. And secondly, which goes hand in glove with that, you never arrive. We never arrive. We never cross the finish line. There's always more to learn. There's always more growth to achieve. There's always more areas we can develop and improve in. And so this series has just been about hopefully being catalytic in you moving forward from wherever your starting point was, moving forward. But it has to continue based on yours and then mine in my own life, pursuing growth and learning. So I've loved teaching this. We've loved having you with us. And we look forward to you joining us again next week for this brand new series, Don't Take the Bait.